I'm Ed Gabriel. I was a former U.S. ambassador to Morocco, and I've been a member of CAA since 2001. I'm going to spend about 5 minutes kind of teeing up the discussion. Then we'll turn it over for some individual comments, and then maybe we'll go to Q&A. There's a saying in the Middle East that the more things change, the more they stay the same. But now some pundits believe that may no longer be true, although the final verdict on what's going on in the Middle East is yet to be known. There does appear, though, to be a potential for a radical turning point in the region, depending on what happens in the coming months. Yesterday, President Trump spoke before the Israeli Knesset of a new peace sweeping across the region. All remaining living hostages have now been released by Hamas, with the prospect of a lasting peace and a viable state for the Palestinian people. In Syria, the totalitarian dictatorship of the Assad family surprisingly ended almost overnight, with the rise of Ahmed al-Shara, who founded the Nusra Front, al-Nusra Front, with the support of al-Qaeda, the terrorist group. And now he stands as the president of Syria, and he wasted no time in starting negotiations with Israel to end their hostilities and their differences. In Lebanon, Hezbollah has been defeated, with their vast cache of strategic weapons destroyed, and increased border protection is now denying Hezbollah, a proxy of Iran, from rearming. The U.S. has signaled strong support for the current government of Lebanon. Even President Trump mentioned it yesterday in his speech to in Sharm el-Sheikh. And it's led by a competent president and prime minister and a technocratic government, making for what many analysts say is the most effective leadership in Lebanon's history in the last half century. Most importantly, Iran has been dealt a major blow in the most recent coordinated attacks by the United States and in Israel, greatly reducing the leadership effect in the region. All of this seems to point to the prospect of a new, peaceful, prosperous Middle East. But the people of the Middle East and their governments are still facing very difficult and challenging obstacles. Let me give you a couple for instances, and our panelists will really get into this. Will the Gaza ceasefire deal hold, and will it lead to some sort of peaceful solution? That depends, because the devil is now in the details. Will Shara be able to bring peace and security to all Syrian people, including the minority populations in Syria, which to date has been a challenge for him? Will President Joseph Aoun and Prime Minister Nawaf Salam disarm Hezbollah, fully disarm Hezbollah, and bring much needed economic reforms in the coming months, or fail to overcome the influence of Hezbollah and the pressure from special interests within the country? Iran is down, but it's not out. Is it capable of reconstituting the axis of resistance in the region? Or will we see an opportunity to explore peace? It will see an opportunity to explore peace with its neighbors, as President Trump alluded to yesterday. Finally, will Israel be prepared to reciprocate the positive steps taken in Gaza, Syria, Lebanon, in order to encourage further progress in peaceful relations in the region? These are the questions I think that we tee up for our panelists today. Joining us are three of the top policymakers on the Middle East here in Washington. They know the region and Iran very well. Pierre, Ghanem, who's in the middle of us, has been a national security and foreign affairs reporter with Arabiya News since 2007. He started his television career in 1982 as a news anchor for the Tele Lebanon. He then moved to the United Kingdom and became the executive editor of MBC, the first privately owned Arabic language television platform. In 2004, Pierre established and launched the news department known as Al Hura at the Middle East Broadcasting Network. Pierre is a renowned Middle East expert. He has appeared on major outlets throughout the world and during the past several decades, particularly on issues of Iraq, Iran, and Lebanon. And he earned his degree at Lebanese University. Ray Takeyh, Ray is the Hasib Sabbagh Senior Fellow at the Middle East Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. His areas of specialization are Iran, U.S. foreign policy, and the modern Middle East. Ray is most recently the author of The Last Shah, America's Iran and Fall, of the Pahlavi dynasty, and the author and co-author of several other books on the Middle East, mainly focusing on Iran and U.S. foreign policy. Prior to joining CFR, Ray served as a senior advisor on Iran at the State Department, fellow at Yale University, Washington Institute for Near East Policy, and the Middle East Center at the University of California. And he holds a PhD in modern history from Oxford. Also with us is Mona Yacoubian. Mona is director and senior advisor of the Middle East program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. She has more than 30 years, believe it or not, of experience working on the Middle East and North Africa with a focus on conflict analysis, governance, stabilization challenges, and conflict prevention. She was previously Vice President of the Middle East and North Africa at the United States Institute of Peace. In 2019, she was Executive Director of the congressionally appointed Syria Study Group. Previously, she served as the Deputy Assistant Administrator at USAID, and she was also at the Department of State's Bureau of Intelligence and Research. Mona is a Fulbright Scholar who earned her MPA at Harvard University Kennedy School and a BA in Public Policy from Duke. Welcome. I couldn't have a better group than this. I'd like to start with, like I said, a brief 5-minute introduction from each of you. After they present, I'll ask a few questions and then open up to the audience. So Ray, how about starting with us with an overview?
Let me just say, well, thank you for inviting me.
Microphone.
This is going well. This is what.
There we go.
Push this button. Yeah. All right, so now I can hear myself. So anyway, thank you for inviting me here today. I'll just say a few things about how I see where Iran is going and where the region is going. And it's tempting to quote Sean Ryan when he asked about the French Revolution. He says, too soon to tell. At this point, from the perspective of the Islamic Republic, and it's almost redundant and a cliche to say it's been a bad couple of years with the diminishing power of the axis of resistance all across the region, and of course the decapitation of the Sunni leadership and the loss of the nuclear installation significantly degraded, who knows. And there are a couple of implications of that. First of all, the regime has not lost its core ideological values and its revolutionary mission, so we'll try to in some way refurbish those particular lost alliances. They may not be able to do so with the same degree of efficiency or any degree of alacrity. But that still remains very much a part of it. If you kind of look at the nuclear profile of the regime, one of the consequences of the June 12-day war is that should Iranian nuclear program be resurrected, it will not be resurrected in the same way. Namely, large facilities that have thousands of centrifuges and are vulnerable, or even digging deep in the mountains, because that did not prove impervious to American munitions. So if you're going to have a expansion of the Iranian nuclear program is likely to be lots of facilities doing the same thing, but in a small workshops. So that'd be a challenge for intelligence communities to detect all of them, and then should they do so, they'll be vulnerable to strike. I don't think they'll go aside from mountains or construct large centrifuge plants. In terms of the domestic, everybody's one of the favorite sports in today Washington is to talk about succession in Iran. The more relevant issue is who governs Iran today, because in my opinion, it is not Ali Khamenei. Since the war, the cascade of his misjudgments have actually rendered him largely useless. This 86, when time in his mother occasionally comes out and gives these seesaw speeches. The question is, succession has already taken place in a way. Who governs Iran is in Iran, in terms of its domestic politics, is always impenetrable. And there's so much about that political system that we don't understand, at least I don't. But the real question is, who is actually governing this country today? Because they are making decisions. They have arrested 20,000 people and executed 2,000. That's a decision. They have had very robust diplomacy by Ali Larijani, failed to stem the snapback of sanctions. But the country's making decisions, and it's not clear to me how those decisions are being made. Maybe some sort of collective leadership, some kind of consensus. But as far as the country is concerned, in my opinion, we have already entered the post-Khamenei period. What that looks like remains to be seen. What the future holds in terms of American involvement and so forth in the region, who knows? The American policy tends to be very cyclical in terms of engagement or lack of engagement, and whether the region is relevant or not. But I still think the United States remains a primary actor in a sense that it's able to impose discipline on the region. You saw it recently. It's not China, it's not going to be the Russian Federation. Whether the United States remain hesitant or not is a decision that's going to be made by body politics. And I'll stop right there.
Thank you. Let's next go to Pierre. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, everyone. I'll try to make some presentation that maybe try to seek clarity about Iran and Lebanon. Iran established Hezbollah in Lebanon in the early 80s. And mainly, Hezbollah has main pillars or tracks. The first one is a group that wants to fight Israel, a militia that is outside the control of the government of Lebanon. And the third one, it believes in the Wilayat al-Faqih, which is a new idea that came to the Lebanese Shia, totally new to us. So what happened since is Hezbollah, during the war, during also the occupation of South Lebanon by the Israeli forces, grew to be a very strong body that always kept working on the three tracks. The one is to fight Israel, two is to be a militia in Lebanon that is outside the control of the government, and three is to have more people who believe in Wilayat al-Faqih. 2024, what we had is a militia that had 40,000 soldiers. It had 200,000 followers of Wilayat al-Faqih. Very strong. They have a lot of money. They borders were ports. They could do a lot of this. So 2025, what do we have? Israel killed 5,000 of their soldiers, injured another 5,000. So they still have 30,000 soldiers. This militia cannot today attack Israel. But this militia is a very serious danger to the Lebanese state and to the Lebanese communities. And it has more than 200,000 people who believe in Wilayat al-Faqih. 2 days ago, they had a gathering in the Olympic Stadium of Beirut, and they gathered something like 60,000 young people from 5 to 15, who were all chanted to Al-Wali al-Khalfi. I would like also, just to confirm this very point, is that Sheikh Naeem Qasim, 2 weeks ago, on September 17th, Sheikh Naeem Qasim talking to the wounded stressed that the wounded adhere to the most complete message, which is the message of Islam, and to Muhammad and his family, and to the guardianship, and to Imam Khomeini, and to the Imam leader Sayyid Ali Khamenei, emphasizing that they look up to the banner of Imam Mahdi. So we are talking here about an organization that we most of the time look at it as a group that wants to attack Israel, or as a terrorist organization that wants to do bad things around the world, and they do. But what I want to also would like you to keep in mind is that this is a religious militia that has so many followers in Lebanon, and they are a very serious danger to the Lebanese communities and to the Republic of Lebanon. What is the situation in Lebanon? And I'm quite sure that Mr. Ambassador, who just came back from Beirut, can talk so much about this. You can ask me in 2 weeks because I'm gone. But now, because he came back, he can talk so much about his experience. The situation today, in addition to what we have about Hezbollah, and we need to talk about the situation in the government and the situation also in Syria. First, since 1975, we started a war, and we were destroying what we tried to build since 1920 to 1975. So you can imagine at this time that we didn't build a state, we didn't build a government. We do probably have a lot of people who are on the payroll of the public service, but we weren't really building a state in Lebanon. We are not really catching up into the modernity with the way that people are behaving with the government. The other side is we have a very important change in Syria. So the situation in Syria is not a convenient reality for Hezbollah. It may be a very good news for the Lebanese state. We have a president, and we have a prime minister, and we have a new government who wants to have a new start. But I mustn't say that we have a weak government that has been being weak since 1975. As I said, we were destroying it since 1975. And now we are asking this government to deal with, one is to deal with the militia that is a threat to the government. And we are asking this government to be honest and not corrupt. And we are asking this government to be a model, honest, and looking forward. So the good news is we have a great president, we have a great prime minister, we have a very good group of ministers in Lebanon, but they do have challenges and they need to be a little bit creative.
Very good, thank you. Mona?
Great, thank you, Ed, and good morning, and thanks to the Council of American Ambassadors for the invitation. So let me start with kind of a top line assessment, which is, I think it is difficult to overestimate just how significant the erosion of Iranian influence across the Middle East has been over the past 2 years. I was asked to speak on Syria, and here I would really, I think this is sort of exhibit A for how it is that Iran has lost such significant influence and reach. And here I would offer really just 3 key points. The first is, I think, that the collapse of the Assad regime in Syria is perhaps the most dramatic example of Iran's loss of influence in the region. It's difficult to, again, overestimate just how significant this development is. When we consider that Iran invested billions in Syria, mobilized thousands of militia fighters in Syria, all in the name of propping up the Assad regime. And with the Assad regime's collapse, we see that Iran essentially lost all of that investment. Most of its fighters have been pushed out of Syria. And I think we have to also appreciate the historic significance of this, which is that the alliance between the Assads in Syria, which went back 50 plus years, and Iran stretches back to 1979. So it was a deeply rooted historic alliance. Syria was the only Arab country to support Iran in its war with Iraq. So that's the first point. It's just sort of underscoring how significant this was. Second, I think, is to sort of pick apart a little bit further what this means. Iran has, for a long time, projected what it called a forward defense strategy in Syria. And this was this idea that Iran, working through Iraq and Syria, was shaping and projecting Shia influence into the Levant. With the collapse of Assad, I think this forward defense strategy has essentially also collapsed. And Iran is in a much weakened position with respect to protecting its interests in the region. We know, for example, that Syria at one point was a key member of the so-called axis of resistance. We are seeing, I think, a pretty significant unraveling of that axis, certainly with the collapse of the Assad regime, with, as Pierre has noted, the decimation of Hezbollah in Lebanon. As a result of this, we see that related, Iran has also lost the use of what was a strategic land bridge that allowed it to flow weapons, particularly sophisticated weapons and financing and money to Hezbollah overland through Syria. This was a much more efficient way of getting resources to Hezbollah. That land bridge is now effectively cut. And the third and last point I'll make really focuses on, it's not only that Iran has lost its strategic depth in Syria, Syria is now actively hostile to Iran with the government of Ahmed al-Shah, who is, as Ed noted, a former Al-Qaeda leader, a Sunni Islamist, with strong and deep antipathy to Iran. As an example, it was interesting, when Israel initiated strikes on Iran, many countries in the Arab world articulated their concern about Israeli action. Sabbagh was one of the very few who remained silent on this question. And this is really about his own vision that Iran, in Sabbah's view, constitutes a strategic threat. That is a 180 from where Syria was really less than a year ago, which is pretty astounding. The last point I'll make, and I'll stop here, because this is a conference about bullies, and the other bully in Syria is Russia. And it's actually quite interesting to note the difference of how Sabbagh treats the Russians versus the Iranians. Again, the Iranians, persona non grata, out of the country, considered a threat, as compared to Russia, where we see, in fact, a much more pragmatic position by Ahmed al-Shah, a desire to try to work with Russia. They are receiving wheat and oil from Russia. They are likely dependent on the Russians for their weapons. And we even have, apparently in the works, a trip by Ahmed al-Shah to Moscow next month, which gives you, I think, an interesting contrast in how Syria is dealing with not one, but two bullies from the region.
Thank you. So as you can see, all things are going well in the Middle East. Ray, let me ask a quick question of each of you. I'll start with you. So where is Iran likely headed? You said we don't know where Iran is headed. Give us some ideas of where you think the options could be. And is there, as President Trump alluded to yesterday, a prospect out there that they could find a peaceful means to move forward?
In my view, the Islamic Republic remains very much an ideological construct. It is very.
Microphone, please.
Sorry. And as I said, in my view, Iran remains very much an Islamic Republic as an ideological construct. It is animated by certain revolutionary values and is intended to maintain those values. So now there's a question of gap between capabilities and intentions. For the foreseeable future, it's no longer going to be a Mediterranean power, which if they kind of thought about this carefully, it's not a bad thing for them. Because as was mentioned, how much money was spent on Syrian civil war? About 15 billion. And that went up to smoke in about 3 weeks. What benefits Iran has had other than ideological from trying to impose some kind of a political imprint on Lebanon? They were not going to see it that way, but actually in some way this truncated empire is benefiting their national interests. It remains very much an important player in the most important region for it, the sub-region of the Middle East, the Gulf. It still has penetrated Iraq, and it has, I think, a fairly good relationship with the Gulf states across the board. The first thing they have to do before they figure out where the country goes is to sort out who's alive, who's dead, and who's going to take essentially these positions. And there's so much that at this point cannot be known because, as I said, in my view, we don't know who's actually running this country. There is some kind of a consensus-based decision that's taking place, which is why it's so hard for them to make decisions. When the European snapback situation was happening in summer, they didn't do anything until July. So only in August, they began to have some sort of diplomacy to forestall that. I suspect at this point you have this sort of a division of labor. Ali Larijani manages the national security portfolio. The head of the judiciary managed internal security in conjunction with the paramilitary forces and revolutionary guards and so forth. There has to be a clerical buy-in because the Islamic Republic cannot be just a standard dictatorship the way Egypt is or other countries. It has to have a clerical dimension to it. But the balance of power within that system is very difficult to say because it's changing and evolving every day. I'll give you one example of how discursive the regime is. Ali Khamenei gave a speech, one of his few speeches, saying that there should be no negotiations with the West. Ali Larijani went ahead and said on 15 occasions he has approached Americans for negotiations and was rebuffed. Both of those statements are official statements of the Islamic Republic within a week. So they have to kind of figure out the system, and maybe they are figuring it out. A couple of points that need to be made about it. The June War and others demonstrated maybe the fragility of the Iranian imperium in the Middle East, but it demonstrated the strength of the regime at home. It was far more resilient than its critics, people like me, thought it would be. It was far more flexible in terms of dealing with its internal situation. There was a measure of political suppleness to it, which reflects the fact that external defeat has not redounded to the regime's disadvantage at home, which is one of the axioms of American political science. So that hasn't happened. The regime is far more resilient and more deeply rooted at home than we had, I think, anticipated.
Thank you. Pierre, Mona, do you want to ask her a follow-up?
Just as trying to prepare ourselves for the other question is how much Iran is interested in pushing its dogma into East and West. I mean, especially into Iraq and maybe Afghanistan.
Again, I would draw a difference between Iraq and the rest because the Iranian security concerns, as far as Iraq is concerned, have predated the revolutionary regime. It was a principal security concern for the monarchy. So there's a lot of continuity between what the Islamic Republic is doing today, this sort of colonization of Iran, and what the Shah tried to do in Iran. The great disjunction between the monarchy and the revolutionary regime is this expansion into the Levant, the Arabis. The Shah walked around Lebanon, but it was too confusing for him. The ties to Lebanon, because there's a sort of a clerical community ties between the two countries. That actually, there was a lot of transporting back of this sort of Shi'i transactionalism that makes Lebanon a particular area of concern for them. To some extent, that even predated the revolution, but obviously has been energized dramatically since the revolution. So in Lebanon, one of the things that Ali Khamenei says, and it's been part of a clerical discourse, is nationalism is a Western disease. What's the difference between a Lebanese Muslim and a Syrian Muslim? You're all Muslims. I mean, this is a construct imposed on us. Later on, that's taken a more sectarian dimension to it. So what happens to the Lebanese Shi'i community would be of continued interest to Iran. Whether it has the land bridges and means of essentially dealing with that, but even during the Iran-Iraq war, there was still very significant Iranian investment and concern with Lebanon. So I suspect that will continue. The opposition to Israel, of course, stems not just from ideological issues, but deep anti-Semitism that permeates the political state of Iran. So the enmities remain. The question is, are the capability going to catch up to the enmities?
And if I could, Ray, just pick up on that, because you don't turn your mic off yet. I mean, you lay down, I think, this really interesting picture of Iran projecting its influence and the particular relationship with Lebanon and the Lebanese Shia. We now see this vastly weakened Iran. And one question that's sort of been in my mind is, should negotiations restart, which is a big if, between the US and Iran, indirectly. One theory out there is that Iran might be willing to acquiesce to the reality in Lebanon of Hezbollah disarming, because it's essentially happening in the name of preserving itself and getting a deal. Is that something you think is possible?
I'll need to point out Pierre to speak about this as more authoritative than I can. I don't see prospect of negotiations starting at this point. And the Iranians do have a point here. What that negotiations got them. They were engaged in a very compressed dialogue with Steve Witkoff, and they got bombed. After they got bombed, they got sanctioned. So, there's not much confidence in negotiations with the West today, directly or indirectly, and maybe some of the negotiation offers were designed to forestall the snapback of sanctions that have come together. In terms of Lebanon, maybe I'm just too invested in the discourse of the regime, maybe they're more pragmatic than I think. I don't think they can dispense with this also, which is, if you look at the post-revolutionary period, outside Iraq, which is a big thing, it's the only success they have had in the Levant. Syria, as was mentioned, went up to smoke for 3 weeks, and it's not going to reconstitute itself the way it was. The Hezbollah is kind of an iconic organization. But Hezbollah actually is also going to become part of the Lebanese political chemistry. I leave it to Pierre. I can get all of that. But these pieces don't add up to me. But there's always a but. It's entirely possible that this is such a dramatically different situation in the Middle East today that those people, like me perhaps, who are too invested in history, may not necessarily see the future. The region may be untethering from its history. And when that happens, usually, we're the last ones to see it.
Let me just pick up. Let me just pick up on that point and ask Pierre a question. So in my recent trip to Lebanon, I talked to the Americans as well as the Lebanese, and I talked to the Americans before I went. They believe that Hezbollah is defeated militarily. They believe that the only weapons they're left with are not non-strategic weapons. That anything coming over the border is not going to harm Israel. they could harm internally, civil strife. So they're also saying, the Americans are also saying, we will not allow, Israel will not allow, the US will not allow Hezbollah to rearm or re-strengthen itself in Syria or Lebanon. This is the Americans talking, that they're determined that this is not gonna happen. The Lebanese are pretty well finished with disarmament south of the Litani. The head of the army said to me last week, we can be absolutely sure by the end of the year, they will have completed total disarmament, have control of the area, and can guarantee to Israel that they won't have rearmament going on there. So my question to you, given kind of your construct of what's going on there, what advice do you have for President Aoun and Nawaf Salam about finishing this job and in terms of where it stands? What would you advise them to do?
I always looked at Hezbollah as a very serious threat to the Lebanese Republic. And the first thing that I would say is that President Aoun and Nawaf Salam, Prime Minister of Lebanon, have to first make sure that the seat of the government is protected. Because if you look at the nature of Hezbollah today, that does not cause any threat to Israel, is a serious threat to Abda, to Yarsi. Those are the seats of the government. So those are a very serious questions for Aoun and for Nawaf Salam, and also to the commander of the army. First, they have to protect themselves from this militia that can deploy on the streets in front of their palaces. Two,
How are they gonna do that?
this is a very well organized militia that, one, you need to make sure that the surrounding area, the zone of Abda, Yarsi, and other places is protected by the Lebanese army. Two, they need to stop Hezbollah from transferring arms from one to another place. So there shouldn't be a line between the Takeyh Valley and the south. There shouldn't be a line open in between Dahi, the south part of Beirut, and the south of Lebanon. And they shouldn't be allowed also to transfer any arm on the main road that goes from Beirut up to the Takeyh Valley.
On that point, it's
Yes.
important to tell the audience that the government took a decision that they would contain all arms. If they're moved, they're gonna be confiscated.
Sure, but until today, we didn't see anything to tell us that they are really taking action at this level. Three, they need to isolate the arms of Hezbollah. So if they know where they are, they need to make sure that they are not able, Hezbollah's members, to move those arms from one to another place. Before we confiscate, they need to make sure that they are not being moved from one to another place. Four, I think that Hezbollah at this time is living on a lot of money that is given by the Lebanese treasury. In this year budget, 2026, we have a budget of $5 billion. By the way, my lovely country is a small country. 5 billion is the whole budget of it. Okay. So there is in the Majlis Al-Janoub, the South Council, $8 billion plus that is given to people, and more than half of this money is for martyrs' families. So we always think that there is smuggling through the port or the airport, but yes, there is. But there is also money that is given by the government to Hezbollah. Now, look, Mr. Ambassador, at how much money is coming to Hezbollah from every ministry and every agency in Lebanon. So they have to stop this. They have to stop taking my money and giving it to Hezbollah. The other thing that is a long term is they need to have a clearer idea about how to get the Shia community to distance itself from Hezbollah. If we are considering, as as figures. 1/4 of the Shia community is Hezbollah, maybe Harakat Aman. There is a 50% that is, let's say, kind to them because those are like my brother, my cousin, my next door neighbor. This is our heritage and other things. Those 50% who are sympathizers with Hezbollah and Harakat Aman needs to have a different choice in the country. And people needs to also understand, especially in the government, the danger that Wilayat al-Faqih is causing to the Shia community. We are here in a place where a member of Hezbollah is in fact acting with allegiance to al-Wali al-Faqih in Tehran, the same way like a Catholic in Europe in the Middle Ages. And this is a very dangerous to the idea of the nation state. So in one line, if you allow me, they need to have a plan that starts from protecting the government to stop Hezbollah from transferring arms. 3, they need to stop funding Hezbollah. And then they need to understand the danger of the Wilayat al-Faqih in the long run.
Let me just pick up on that last point. You alluded to the need to win the hearts and minds of the people. They have to have an alternative other than Hezbollah in terms of being taken care of, their well-being, jobs, and other social services. But the counter argument to that is what you said, and that is won't money to the south actually before Hezbollah is fully disarmed, actually empower Hezbollah indirectly, even if the money's not coming from them?
The problem with the money is if this money is leaked to Hezbollah. What I'm trying to say is that the government that has nothing's budget for reconstruction needs to come up with something where they can create factories, they can create new enterprises. They need to create a new relationship in between the worker and the money. Capitalism is a good example. Creating a different economy for the people where they don't have to go and beg for money from a religious militia. So they need to recreate this whole thing.
So as long as Hezbollah doesn't get credit for it.
As long as Hezbollah does not get the money from
Or the credit.
all the credit.
They're pretty good at communication. Mona, you might want to ask, Ray, you might want to ask any questions.
What I was gonna ask is, all the things that you mentioned here, how practically can they be done? I mean, to not give money for the martyrs, that's social services. Can a state really exclude a certain constituency from social service provision and maintain this fragile compact that all different religious groups have bought into? Then would that be a discriminatory practice that essentially undermines however better this governing compact is?
Well, one, if they are getting their money on Lebanese pound, they need to keep taking it on a Lebanese pound if you don't want to capital, which doesn't make a lot of money for that. But when you try to stop corruption, stop this leaking, can the government say, well, I'm going to pay for this and that? The answer is yes. And let me give you another example. There is in Lebanon, we have an information ministry, which is a public place. It has hundreds of people who are working there as like they are registered, they are getting paid, but they don't do anything. So
that's true a lot of places. That's just some places in Washington.
that's why you are saying that the Trump is right with stopping funding PBS and other public organizations. What I'm trying to say is, what happened is over the years, since the 80s, they put their wives and their kids and themselves as public servants, but they are not working. So if you go back and say, that this agency or this ministry, instead of needing 1,200 workers, needs only 120. So the other people needs to go and find a different job. So the other thing is they need to stop helping them by doing things that are like, they go and register themselves as an NGO. So if you are an NGO, you can get through the port of Beirut legally, okay? No tax, no customs, anything you want for your school. So you don't need to do this money, but you are getting so much things that are not taxed anyway.
So Pierre, you're sort of describing the age-old patronage system that has really kind of governed how Lebanon operates. And it sounds like the answer to this is something new to Lebanon, which is the establishment of strong state institutions that are transparent, accountable, not rife with corruption. What is the sequencing? How does because how do we move from this client patron system to one that is really more defined by strong governance, which in my view is the answer to addressing non-state actors like Hezbollah and also, by the way, Iran?
I think the easiest answer, regardless if it is right or wrong, is privatization. We must, in Lebanon, keep only what is essential to the government for the government, and we have to give everything else to a private sector, or at least a mixed private with public. I worked in Lebanon for 9 years as a news anchor, and we were 51% public and 49% private. Lebanon was making a lot of money. I was well paid. So can this be looked at in a different way? Yes. The problem is, by loading so many people into the payroll of the government, and then they get paid themselves, their wives get paid, they get social security, they get everything. So they get everything because there is this, what you call the patronage. Is yes, but we need to move in a different direction, and we cannot do it if we keep everyone on the payroll of the government.
So let me just switch to Mona, a question for her, and then we might take a few from the audience. Mona, under what circumstances can Syria protect itself from resurgence of Iran? And even second part, what does Syria need to do moving forward under the circumstances that they're faced? How can Shara get over the challenges that he has?
So in a way, my answer relates to my question to Pierre, which is basically the best guarantee for Syria against a return of Iranian influence is the success of the country's current path of stabilization and transition. If Shara can indeed not only consolidate control over various armed factions, both within his coalition, but also from other, and in this case, minority groups. He has to first consolidate control, and then much of it will depend on how he governs. He has to govern in a way in which he gets the buy-in from Syria's many minorities, whether it's the Kurds in the northeast, the Druze in the south, of course, the Alawites, and there are huge issues there with transitional justice. But the best safeguard against Iran making its way back into Syria is Syria's successful transition. The opposite is also true. If Shara fails, if the country falls back into instability, and we've seen pretty harrowing instances of sectarian violence in Syria, on the coast in the spring against the Alawite community, in the south this past summer against the Druze community, and even a few weeks ago in the north, outside of Aleppo, when there were clashes between Sunni forces and Kurdish elements. If that trend continues and Syria falls back into instability, that is the opening for Iran to take advantage of chaos in Syria and reinsert itself.
Ray or Pierre?
I'll just say, the current Syrian government is trying to do what the previous Syrian government tried to do, control all of Syria. And to a large extent, my question is, a lot of external powers that are interested in Syria, and particularly I want to talk about, if you can, the role of Turkey, Israel, they're actually not interested in having a strong Syria, controlling all of its boundaries and territory. How does that work in terms of interaction between internal aspiration and external mandates? Israelis are bombing anybody they want, however they want, for as long as they want, and others, everybody's interested in keeping Syria disunited.
I'm not sure I agree with that everyone is interested. I think let's start with Israel, where I would certainly agree with your characterization. And indeed, the Israelis have been clear, when coming to Washington soon after Saddam came into power, noting that they wanted to see a weak and fragmented Syria. They wanted Saddam to be off balance because of their concerns about his Al-Qaeda past. And as a result, we have seen Israel take fairly aggressive action in Syria, both in terms of airstrikes, including on the presidential palace, including on the Ministry of Defense. We've seen Israeli ground incursions occupying significant portions of southern Syria, and we've seen the Israelis actually intervene and interfere in these tensions with the Druze community. And so that is deeply concerning, and that's where we've seen the United States actually take a very interesting role through Tom Barra, who has worked to mediate between Israel and Syria and seek to de-escalate those tensions and even perhaps come forward with an agreement or an arrangement, as I've been told is called, on defense and security between the two countries. We'll see if that comes to fruition. I would a little bit disagree with how you framed Turkey. Yes, the Turks are certainly concerned about Kurdish elements, but they actually argue the opposite. They don't want to see a Kurdish entity separate in Syria. They are actually looking for a unified Syria in which the Kurds would be integrated into Damascus. And we'll see, there's maybe some small progress that's been made recently. The one region or country that you did not raise are the Gulf. And here I think it's important to note that the Gulf actually sees an incredible opportunity in a stabilized Syria. Not only because of the restoration of Sunni power in the heart of the Levant, but because of their own desires to see the region or see tensions in the region de-escalate as part of their broader objectives of diversifying their economies, building out economic ties and even economic corridors across the Middle East. And so what we've seen recently, as opposed to how we saw the Gulf act in the past during Syria's civil war, we've actually seen the Gulf come together with Turkey, by the way, and work cooperatively in Syria, work strategically to try and move Syria's transition forward. We'll see if it's successful.
Okay, we've got 5 minutes, so why don't we turn to the audience, Stuart?
I have a microphone for you.
Okay. Hezbollah had the 100,000 or 200,000 missile thing that Israel had there. Has Israel neutralized those? And Lebanon used to be the Riviera of the Middle East. What does it take for that to happen again?
Lebanon is a small country and can be fixed, but needs help. The first thing that Lebanon needs is a creative government. I'm saying this because my impression is that the government is somehow stuck in its ways. It's stuck with the large body of public servants that are in the government. And they need to relook at the whole economy of the country in a different way. So to bring back prosperity to Lebanon is very easy. The whole GDP of the country is between 25 and 30 billion. So it's like you are fixing a county in California. Okay, so they need first to look at the people who are on the payroll. They need to recruit the new people and to get people into the government to have a better way of doing their jobs as public servants. They need to offload anything that is really a burden on the treasury of the government. They need to go back to the idea of you are a small business owner, so you can take care of yourself. You don't ask the government to give you the money. And the other thing that needs to be done is Lebanon did not see in its history a real industrialization. We need to go into some industrialization in the country, because without having the factories, without having the idea of industrialization, we are going to be staying as a third world country from the 19th century or the early 20th century.
Let me add to that. I think it's two things. One, corruption. They've got to have a more transparent government. They got to get rid of corruption. Two is stability, and that means finishing the job on Hezbollah. Those are the two big things that would bring the country back. One last question.
Yes, thank you, Ed. My question is for Ray, and I want to come back to that observation you made at the beginning and then elaborated on slightly. It's not clear who's running Iran these days.
Right.
But
it is running.
Yeah, okay, it is running, that's obvious. And you suggested that there may be some kind of de facto division of labor between Larijani on the national security or foreign affairs side and other figures on the domestic side. But could you speculate maybe a little bit more about that? How could something be running with a divided kind of revolutionary government like this? And is there, despite its opacity, is there anything there that's exploitable by those of us who would like to see a weaker and less malevolent Iran?
Right. One of the things that the Islamic Republic has always done is establish all kinds of bodies where different branches of government come together. So it's entirely possible that these decisions are being made in a statutory way, in an institutional way, in the Supreme National Security Council that involves everybody, both domestic and foreign. And the demarcation between domestic and foreign is clear. The Supreme National Security Council deals with internal affairs as well as external ones. Right now, you're seeing a division, maybe some degree of unification of the elite, or the elite that matters outside the kind of reformers. So they have come together. If you kind of, one of the criticism of Larijani has come from his predecessor, Takeyh. And actually, he was very much told to sit down. This is a perilous time and we have to come together. So the institutions of the state may be operating. What I kind of, given this opacity, is to what extent do they actually still get their direction from the money? That's a huge office, by the way, he has. That office has a lot of money. That office has representatives in every agency and every province and every government and every militia. Who do they report to? I mean, you know, so I don't think you have survived the attack. This particular cascade of judgment, it is entirely possible that Lebanon himself has stepped back. I mean, you know, 6 and the math is the math. And the project, his 35-year project, that was essentially built with Morocco for defense. The idea of George Bush actually right there, that collapsed. His nuclear program that he invested billions in has collapsed, and that's been subject of public censure, because many people have told him that we should have crossed the nuclear threshold early during the post-October 2003 period, and he didn't do it. So that's been an issue of public criticism from the Revolutionary Guard and other right-wing. 71 parliamentarians on the record saying we should develop nuclear weapons. Now, their parliamentarians are like our parliamentarians. You know, that may or may not mean anything. But so the country is making decisions. And what I don't know is how much supervision is from the leader's office. And what we have always thought about, the leader's office is critical for mediating the disputes between these various factors. They being mediated by someone.
Very good panel, very good.